I'd like to talk about psychedelics. Probably a substantial percentage of those of us in this room owe a certain debt of gratitude to those teachers. And I'm thrilled that National Institutes of Mental Health are doing research, especially with terminally ill people. There are legal ibogaine clinics in Mexico that seem to have the ability to totally remove drug cravings from people, at least for a period of 6 months. How do you, from a consciousness only, make sense of those experiences, and what do you think they're valuable?
Yes. I don't know anything about psychedelics. Bach is as psychedelic as I get. And he's pretty far out.
You can have both.
So I'm not qualified personally to speak of psychedelics, but I'm not in a position to argue with the evidence that this is hard evidence. So how could we incorporate that in this consciousness-only model? Remember that these substances that people take only appear to be made out of stuff called matter when viewed from a second-person perspective, just as the streets of London that appear in a dream only appear to be made out of matter from the separate subject of experience in the dream. That goes for this little tablet, whatever it is, or this herb, or whatever it is. This is not a substance made out of matter that you are ingesting. It is made of mind. It is the activity of mind. Your mind is being reprogrammed. It only appears that you're taking a substance from a second-person point of view. When you take the substance, do you experience something physical? No, it is all sensation and perception and imagining. So these substances, of course, that they are made of mind, and they have the power to alter the mind. It is everyone's experience, whether you've taken psychedelics or not, that if you have a glass of wine, it alters your mind. A glass of wine is not something physical. It is a movement of mind. That's an unsatisfied smile.
No.
It's an English smile. Oh, no, it's an East Coast smile. Particularly, it's an English smile.
No, I'm not at all dissatisfied with that answer.
You're not at all
dissatisfied
okay.
with that answer, and grateful that the research is seeming to indicate that they have the power to relieve the suffering of terminally ill people.
Why not?
And alleviate their fear of death.
Of course.
Alhamdulillah.
Yes, of course. Why not use it?
Yes. But I just liked what you said from how do you see this from a consciousness-only model.
Yes.
And my smile is partly because with more traditional kind of plant medicines, they're not really thought of exactly as material objects.
I'm sure you're right that the original kind of shamanic approach it is probably much closer to what we're speaking of here than Western medicine's approach would be. Because they, as we know, they didn't consider the material world to be something separate from ourselves and outside of ourselves, made out of something other than ourselves. They may not have formulated it, and they didn't formulate it in the way we do here, but they had this deep feeling of the interconnecting, the underlying reality that we all share. And this was very much part of the way they used plants. Their use of plants was an expression of this understanding.
Ayahuasca is called grandma.
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 Yeah. but there's an interesting question, which is a kind of an inevitable follow-on from your question, is should one use these substances for spiritual purposes, not to relieve physical pain, but ultimately to recognize one's true nature? And I don't see that question very, given that these substances, we agree, or we're open to the possibility that they are activities of the mind rather than objects made out of matter. The question is not dissimilar to the question, should one use a mantra to recognize one's true nature? Because the mantra is also an activity of mind. So from this perspective, there's not that much difference between using a mantra, which is an activity of mind, or using a psychedelic or a herb. And as I said earlier this week, in the early stages of our investigation, for one whose mind is dispersed restlessly over 10,000 things, it may be necessary as a halfway stage to focus one's mind, to gather the energies, the disparate energies of one's mind together on a single object before it is sufficiently quiet to sink back into itself. And so that then, in the same way that a mantra can have a kind of preparatory function in the sinking of the mind into the heart, there's no reason why such a substance couldn't be used in the same way, that is, as a preparation. But in the end, the recognition of our true nature is between ourself and itself. No activity of the mind can ever produce, nothing that King Lear does will ever make the knowledge, I am John Smith, appear in his world. So ultimately, just as no meditation technique can be used for the recognition of our true nature, no substance could be either.
And no Bach.
And no Bach. No. The playing of Bach is nothing to do with the return to our true nature. It is everything to do with the expression of the beauty that is innate in our true nature. It is the via positiva. If we want to know about ourselves, there is no distance. He sent himself from himself, through himself, to himself. There's no distance between the self and itself. No room for Bach, no room for a mantra, no room for psychedelics, no room for devotion to a guru, no room for anything. It's just between ourself and itself.
Hi, Rupert.
Hi.
I have a question about belief. I've wondered this for a long time. I know that reality appears in accordance with the beliefs of our finite mind. So that makes me think that belief is a very powerful thing in terms of what we experience. Can belief, say, override like the laws of physics, or the laws of mind, as we now call them? I'm confused, I think, about what belief is and what role it plays in our overall experience.
A belief is a downgraded concept. That is, a concept that we believe refers to something that is absolutely true. So, for instance, a table is a concept. Nothing wrong with that concept. It becomes a belief if we believe that the concept, a table, refers to something that has an independent existence of its own. Concepts are not a problem. Beliefs are a problem. It's not necessary to... concepts are necessary for human beings, but beliefs are not necessary.
Right, and I'm wondering if, because belief seems to have the power to obfuscate or obscure
Yes. Yes.
reality?
If we believe, you remember the story of when a cine film was first taken to a village in India, and in the movie a lion was shown running down the road towards the viewer, and everyone in the cinema ran out of the cinema because it seemed so real that they thought that the lion was coming for them. So they had their belief that the lion was real profoundly conditioned their experience. First of all, it conditioned their feelings. They were terrified. And that feeling conditioned their activities. They ran out of the cinema. So that is an example of how belief doesn't change what is actually there. So in that way, it doesn't override the laws of physics. It just filters what is actually there. What is actually there, relatively speaking, is a screen with a line running down the road on it. That's what's actually there. But belief filters that, and our experience of what is actually there depends upon this filter of belief. If you withdraw your belief, then you see things as they are. So our dualistic way of seeing experience, our belief and subsequent feeling that experience is divided into a subject and object, that is a belief. It seems to be real, just as the lion coming towards you out of the screen seems to be real, but and that there is a reality to the lion running down the road. It is, relatively speaking, the movie. But it is our belief that filters that reality and gives us our experience. So what we are looking at now is reality. Reality is not behind what we are all experiencing. Reality is what we are all experiencing. There isn't a reality beyond this. This is reality, but it is filtered through our belief that experience is divided into two essential parts, a subject that knows and an object that is known. And reality appears to us in accordance with that belief. And as a result, we think and feel in a way that is consistent with that belief, and subsequently we act and relate in a way that expresses this belief in the world. So all that is necessary is to withdraw that belief. It's not necessary to... Reality doesn't need to be created or found. It is already there. All that is necessary is to remove the filter of beliefs. It is not necessary... This is what I mean when I say our self is not an enlightened self. There is no self that becomes enlightened. That the self is already fully luminous in all people. It is already shining brightly in the midst of experience, but it is dimmed or eclipsed by experience. So enlightenment is not a new experience that we find. It is just about going back to our essential irreducible self, that to which we refer when we say simply I am.
Right, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Belief is always a very subtle interpretation of our experience. We don't realize we're interpreting. Most people think that experience is just inherently divided into a subject and an object. That's just because it's the way it seems to be. Most people don't realize that that is in fact a belief that is superimposed upon the reality of our experience. Where does that belief come from? It comes from the primary belief that I am a person. And this belief, I am a person, most people do not consider it to be a belief. Most people consider it to be a fact. And this is why it is not investigated. So most scientists, for instance, start their investigation into the nature of the universe with the premise, I am a person. And everything they discover about the universe appears in accordance with and as a reflection of that primary belief. But because they don't realize that it is a belief, they take it to be an absolute fact. They never question the nature of the mind with which they know the world. And therefore all they ever know of the world is a reflection of their beliefs about themselves. That is why scientists have not yet discovered the nature of the universe. Just because they have not yet discovered the nature of their own mind, the nature of themselves. That their experience of themselves is still filtered through their belief, I am a person, I am a temporary, finite, limited consciousness. Just one other thing, just as an aside, you talked about altering the laws of physics. In other words, this is what we call a miracle. When something seems to depart from the laws of physics, like walking on water, for instance. And how might we understand something like this? Go back to the conversation I had with someone over here yesterday when I talked about the unfocused camera, the pure colorless consciousness, and as it focuses, it goes through these layers of the collective unconscious, the personal unconscious, the dream state and the waking state. And the waking state being the most limited and the most focused state of mind, at least as that we are aware of. So all the laws of physics refer to our experience in the waking state. But given that everything that we perceive in the waking state from this perspective is the activity of consciousness, yes, it's not a physical object in its own right, but it is an activity of consciousness. In the waking, all the laws of physics refer to the activity of consciousness in the waking state. But imagine one were to, in the waking state, one were able to trace back one's experience, whilst remaining in the waking state, all the way back through the dream state, the personal unconscious, the collective unconscious, to the primal activity of consciousness, before it has crystallized into the habits of mind that we see in the waking state. And one were able to access that realm in the waking state, one would then be able to alter the habits of mind in the waking state. That would produce a miracle in the waking state. The laws of physics would not operate. One would be able to fly or walk on water. So it's. I know this wasn't really your question, but you referred to the laws of physics. So about whether it would be possible to alter the laws of physics. So yes, we must admit the possibility that if in the waking state one were able to trace back the activity of consciousness, remember all of this is the activity of consciousness, if we were able to trace it back in the waking state to the primary activity that gives rise to this, and we were to alter it somehow, the laws of physics in the waking state would change, and we would experience a miracle.
I think you actually got to the question behind my question, because I was kind of wondering how laws of physics are enforced, I think.
The laws of physics in this approach are not laws that govern the nature of matter. They are laws that govern the habits of mind. And there's no reason why, if one were not to trace back those habits to their origin, the first vibration, that one would not be able to change those habits. And a change in those habits would produce a change in what we call the laws of physics, and it would create a miracle. And it could be that the events we hear of in the traditions where people had these powers, that they were, yes, extraordinary in the sense that they're not the normal habits of mind that most of us are familiar with. But there's no reason to suggest that some people did not spend a long time training to go all the way back in their experience to this primary vibration and alter their experience from there. There's nothing spiritual about it, by the way. It's just, if you're interested in doing that, you remember the story, the Shankaracharya used to tell this story of the devotee who came running to his teacher after training for 30 years to walk on water, and he finally managed to master this habit of mind, and he came full of pride to his teacher and said, "Master, look what I can finally do after 30 years. And the master simply said, "What a waste of time, you can take the ferry for 5 rupees. So these are possibilities of mind, the possibilities within the mind. You know, the waking state is only a very narrow slice of what is potential in consciousness, and one can take substances, engage in practices that expand the compass of the waking state, and there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's nothing to do with recognizing one's true nature or knowing the nature of reality. There's nothing spiritual about it, but that's not a reason for not doing it. I personally, and this is just my personal view, I personally feel that there is so much in the normal bandwidth of the waking state that is worthy of exploration, like Bach's music, or a good backhand in tennis. that I'm more interested in spending the rest of my life developing these skills than thinking about what may lie beyond the waking state that one might explore. But other people are not interested in Bach's music or perfecting some kind of physical form or movement. They're more interested in taking ayahuasca and exploring regions of the mind that lie outside the waking state. So I'm not making any judgment about these, but there's nothing, they shouldn't be considered to be spiritual. If anything is spiritual, what is spiritual is, one, to recognize the nature of that to which we refer when we say I am. In other words, to recognize the nature of that which in the Christian tradition is referred to as spirit. And two, communicate, share, express, and celebrate that in one's life. That's what I consider to be a spiritual life. My son Matthew used to have an imaginary friend when he was, I guess he was 4 or 5. He was called Tiam. And Tiam used to come everywhere with us. And Tiam was very real. For him, he was not an imaginary friend. It was like his brother. He would come everywhere. And he would speak of him as if he was with us. So his mother and I would just talk about Matthew and Tiam. And they he would just come everywhere. It was just like part of the family. And one day, the family went to Greece for a holiday, and we came back, and we noticed that Matthew stopped talking about Tiam, and we asked him about it, and he said, no, Tiam stayed in Greece. He didn't come back.
Wow.
And we never heard of him again.
And he was fine?
It was just his way. His mind was obviously, he was coming out of his world into our, slowly, as a child does, slowly coming into our concrete waking state world. So initially, Cham was as real to him as our waking state world is to us. But as his mind, as he grew up, his imagination began to recede into the background as the objects of the waking state began to come into the foreground. So Tiam no longer fitted in his world, but he had to give him a dignified, he had to get rid of him in a dignified and rational, in a way that was consistent with his new experience. So the way his mind thought of that, and he said it in all seriousness, no, Tiam didn't come back from Greece. So his mother and I just, okay, that's right, and we just moved on. I felt it was so intelligent. I felt it was an innate intelligence of a child's mind that would build a story like this in order to make sense of its evolving experience. I thought it was beautiful and very, very intelligent. Just a kind of innate intelligence of a child's mind as it begins to come into our world. And this teaching and this metaphor is part of the process of kind of continuing to evolve out of this concrete world of names and forms into another kind of world. And anyone who has children or have been close to children know that it's very naive to think that a child is just born into this world. It takes a child years to come into the world that we now take for granted. And parents that don't realize this make so many mistakes with their children because they think the child is sharing the same world that they're seeing. No, for a world for a child, the child of their imagination, for a child that their imagination is so much more concrete than our concrete world. It takes years for a child to fully incarnate in this world. It took me a while to realize that.